Now I will tell you about some input nodes I found especially interesting. Which are the purely input parameters on my diagram? We have, of course, the documentation about the site, the program, the city norms, tools like the Neufert, and also some I haven't talked about yet, and which are perhaps a bit less obvious. I called them memories, references from books, past experience, circumstances, and references from the web. All of these acted like inputs, not as elements of the project directly, but from the outside world. If we look at the top view of my diagram, so where they are placed on my rational versus emotional scale, we notice that the program and site are, for instance, rather rational, the reference operations fairly in the middle, and the memories and circumstances vary in the depth. I will come back to them later. Let's focus first on the references. During the whole project, I was asking myself a lot about creativity, about how we get ideas and where they come from, what is inspiration, what is copying. The neurologist Oliver Sacks addresses the theme of creativity in his book The River of Consciousness.
All of us, to some extent, borrow from others, from the culture around us. Ideas are in the air, and we may appropriate, often without realizing, the phrases and languages of the times. We borrow language itself, we did not invent it. We found it, grew up into it, though we may use it, interpret it, in very individual ways. What is at issue is not the fact of borrowing or imitating, of being derivative, being influenced, but what one does with what is borrowed or imitated or derived. How deeply one assimilates it, takes it into oneself, compounds it with one's own experiences and thoughts and feelings, places it in relation to oneself, and expresses it in a new way, one's own.
Creativity, as described here, is, in my opinion, applied in a slightly different way to architecture than to other disciplines. The architectural practice is rooted in reality. Indeed, ignoring the endless databases and references from the outside world when trying to have the best possible functioning result wouldn't make sense. Sometimes these references can be a product of a creative assimilation. We'll come to that later. But to me, fragments of reality can also be implemented in a project after an active and conscious research. Maybe the creativity then lies in the selection of these fragments of references and exterior opinions. Now, let me explain the very deep nodes, memories, and experience. Oliver Sacks describes something I can really relate to.
Creativity involves not only years of conscious preparation and training, but unconscious preparation as well. This incubation period is essential to allow the subconscious assimilation and incorporation of one's influences and sources, to reorganize and synthesize them into something of one's own.
I tried to map this long-term subconscious work in the nodes past experience or memories. This time it is not an active search, but more a passive remembering of sources that have been assimilated. Let's dive into the memory node of my diagram. The first memory that intruded in my design of the project in Kreuzberg was the trip to Barcelona. The project Waldenseven became a reference.
Je ne me rappelle même plus d'où ça vient. Un livre, un projet.
I somehow had this blurry memory of each inhabitant being responsible for a tree in a park or a courtyard. While thinking of materialities for the inside of my units, I remembered an analysis of the cabanon from Le Corbusier I made at the UDK. We had made a beautiful model of it, and I really enjoyed its materiality. The third loop was my memory of the FU campus library. The white color and the vivid brightness inspired me to try to create similar situations in the study rooms on the ground floor of my project. The last thing I consciously remembered, which influenced my design process, was the traditional villas I saw during a trip to Japan a few years ago. The way of working with light there is very different from European practices, and I enjoyed the diffuse light that resulted from the translucent walls or wooden grids. Let me now explain the node circumstances. For this node, I relied on something that the great mathematician Poincaré has pointed out through empirical evidence during his mathematical research.
These sudden inspirations never happen except after some days of voluntary effort, which has appeared absolutely fruitless. These efforts then have not been as sterile as one thinks. They have set agoing the unconscious machine, and without them it would not have moved, and would have produced nothing.
What Poincaré describes here is for me the short-term subconscious work. Whenever I noticed that a solution to a problem, an idea, popped out in my head under certain circumstances, I tried to capture them. Circumstances also trigger memories, which aren't a direct answer to a problem but contribute to a project. Let's look into the diagram. The first time circumstances led me to an idea was during my daily S-Bahn ride, where, in my opinion, the subconscious becomes very active and sometimes shows its work. This moment brought up my ideas and goals about the circulation and the pedestrian street.
De pronto, porque hace calor.
This confrontation of temperature and space is how I think my memory of Barcelona was triggered. A very direct association was the reflection on my computer screen of the green beans a student has been growing on the 401 terrace. The third time happened when a friend was visiting me in Berlin. During a conversation in the kitchen, I remembered the Japanese villas, maybe because we had talked about them in the past, difficult to say, or simply because of this collision of worlds, this distortion of my daily routine. I often need hours to fall asleep, and it sometimes feel that I am experiencing what Poincaré described.
One evening, contrary to my custom, I drank black coffee and could not sleep. It seems, in such cases, that one is present at his own unconscious work, made partially perceptible to the overexcited consciousness, yet without having changed its nature.
Indeed, in such moments, I feel like I have no control left on my thoughts, being merely a spectator of them. But they often end up being relevant for whichever problems I was trying to solve during the day. To sum up, I sometimes observe during the process circumstances triggering a memory or making me think of a reference or directly an idea. The memories sometimes themselves led me to references or ideas. It also happened that an idea came to my mind while working consciously with references. Of course, this probably happened more times and in more complex ways all over the project, but it is difficult to be aware of this process since it's mostly unconscious. I think this tensions between when we look for things versus when things come to us is fascinating, especially in architecture where we continually compose with abstract ideas as well as fragments of reality. Being open to circumstances leading to such situations can be powerful.